received a PhD in International Relations and Affairs from the Central University of Kerala. And her expertise is on soft power and diplomacy, where she has published numerous papers and presented different international conferences and also has chaired many sessions. It's our honor to have you with us, ma'am. I warmly welcome you. Next, Dr. Biphuti Mary Kachap. I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing the word properly. I mean the name properly.
Correct with the pronunciation. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. So, Dr. Biphuti Mary is an assistant professor at the IIT Tirupati. She received her PhD from IIT Dhanbad. Her areas of interest include South Asian literature and cultural studies, migrant literature, and diaspora. Some of her notable publications include Narration of the Displaced, a study of female character on the novel island of 1,000 Mirrors. And she has published numerous publications too in different reputed journals and has contributed to the field of South Asian literature. I welcome you, ma'am. I'd like to introduce Dr. Carlo Santoro. Hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, sir. Thank you.
It's perfect. It's okay.
Thank you. Dr. Carlo Santoro is an Italian consultant and an associate professor of architecture and urban design at the American University in Phnom Penh, Cambodia. So with over 2 decades of experience, So with over 2 decades of experience in Asia, he holds a PhD in architecture and construction and MSc in construction engineering. Yes, and Dr. Santoro's academic career include a full-time assistant professor role at North-South University in Dhaka, Bangladesh, and a research position at the Chinese Academy of Science in Beijing. He was also awarded a postdoctoral research fellowship in cultural heritage preservation. So, Dr. Santoro has a remarkable portfolio of nearly 30 publications. It's really honored to have you with us today, sir.
A pleasure.
Now I'd like to introduce Dr. Degi Varghese. Dr. Degi Varghese is a faculty in the Department of Psychology at SRM University, AP. She's just like our neighbor. So, and she has completed her PhD. Sorry, she has completed her MPhil in psychology from IIT Hyderabad, and she has been awarded Research Excellence Award from IIT Hyderabad. And she is very much interested in critical and analytical exploration of topics that are less researched in the field of psychology, particularly from an interdisciplinary perspective. Some of her publications include From Text to Context, the relevance of digital ethnography in Foucauldian discourse analysis of online gender talk in Kerala, and predicators of health behavior among Indian college students, and exploratory study. It gives me an immense pleasure to introduce you, ma'am. Thank you for being with us today. And now I'd like to introduce Dr. Pilar Gracious Garcia. She is the director of the Asian Studies Center of the University of Valladolid, Spain. She holds a PhD in English Studies with her research focusing on the influence of Asian cultures and languages on Western literary traditions. She has made significant contributions to the study of Asian literature, particularly in the context of its translation and reception in Europe, which is very much needed in the contemporary situation. And she has published numerous articles and books on topics such as the portrayal of Asia in Western literature and the role of translation in cross-cultural exchanges. We welcome you, ma'am. Now, I'd like to introduce Dr. Emilio Hernandez Correa. He is the Deputy Director of the Asian Studies Center at the University of Valladolid, Spain, with a specialization in economics. He holds a PhD in economics with his research focusing on the economic relationships between Spain and Asian countries. His work has explored topics such as international trade, foreign direct investment, and economic integration between Europe and Asia. His research has been published in various international journals and has contributed to the understanding of economic dynamics in the context of global trade. I welcome you, sir. Now I'd like to introduce Rahul Puti. He is a scholar at the Manipal Center for European Studies, where he has from Manipal University has been specialized in cultural studies, and he holds a master's degree in European studies with a focus on the cultural interactions between Europe and India. His research delves into the historical and contemporary exchanges between these regions, examining how cultural narratives are shaped and reshaped through migration, colonization, and globalization. It gives me an immense pleasure to welcome you as well, sir.
Thank you.
That is all about the introduction of our esteemed professors here. Now, I would like to request Dr. Babu ma'am to please take over the session and initiate the roundtable discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Badusha, for that kind introduction and the detailed bios of all our roundtable participants here. So this is day 2 of the conference, and we are focusing on the Global South dialogues. And I think during this time, when there is much debate, and in the future there are larger anticipated debates on the Global North, Global South dialogues, I think this platform gives us a thrust to kickstart or initiate the discussions in a varied, maybe also a multidisciplinary approach. Because right now I'm very fortunate to chair or moderate this session, which has scholars ranging from architecture to literature to politics, language, and even cultural studies. So I think we right now are the good selected lot of bunch who can initiate this discussion, and maybe we can start working on writing a small report together as to what further out of this discussion we would be able to constructively provide for or towards the Global South dialogues. So let me start with Dr. Bibhuti here. Ma'am, what do you think that we should be focusing on, especially while we talk about the issues of sustainability and the various perspectives from Global South?
So basically, I work more on gender. So I'll be answering this from the aspect of gender. Now, I basically work on literature, and I oscillate between films, popular culture, and also, the literature that is coming out from the global south. And particularly, 2, 3 examples that I would like to put forth as how the representation has been in popular media or popular culture per se, or rather literature. So there was a text. It's a fiction, but it is basically based on non-fiction incidents that had happened. And the title is Adivasi Will Not Dance. It was written by Shaurendra Shekhar, and it was also banned because it was in a way calling out the government, and it was banned for a few years and then again reinstated. He himself is a doctor by profession, and he also was reinstated in his position later. Now, in this particular work that he talks about, there are few aspects which we should look into when we talk about eco-criticism, right? There's also part and parcel of how we look into the debate of sustainability and gender. Now, most often the literature available on sustainability also brings us to a point where we see that it is gendered, right? Women often are equated with nature, and how nature, the animals in the zoo, how they are caged. Similarly, women are marginalized in the society. So more often the debate is about women and how the nature, is equated. But if we particularly talk about this particular, again, book, it does not bifurcate on the aspect of gender, because each and every one in this society, this book is based in Jharkhand. There's a place called Godda, which is highly populated by the Santals, and Santal is one of the prominent tribes in Jharkhand. And therefore, we see that all the population there are affected irrespective of their gender. Now, it is basically, based on an incident around 2013 that happened, when the Jindal plant was supposed to be set up there, and the society at large, the Santals, tried to protest against it. And it is about how the society treats the marginalized people, and there is no debate of sustainability. It's all about job prospects that they are discussing, but what about the sustainability aspects? So whatever the power plant will generate as the in the waste, it goes to that particular place, to that village, and it hampers their everyday life, because the water is contaminated. And through those debates, this particular aspect of sustainability debate or ecology has been dealt with. And another point of instance that we can draw from here, that tribals again are very much equated with nature, that they are the people of the nature as they have been regarded as. But and in one of the instances, these tribals are asked to come and perform, right, for a dignitary who is going to come to inaugurate that particular plant. And when you see that these people resist, they say that we will not perform in front of them, and that is why the title that Adivasi will not dance. So at one place you equate the tribals with the with nature. They are part and parcel of nature, and on the contrary, you're disturbing their flora and fauna. So how are you going to look into that debate? That is one aspect of how gender plays a significant role, where we do not see a lot of debates around women suffering more in terms of gender as the larger literature has been. And then again, I would bring in another film, again, since I'm talking about that particular place, and it can be applicable to other parts of India as well as other parts of South Asia as well. There was a film called Maji the Mountain Man. So it talks about the guy, which is the protagonist, who builds a road. So he draws down the mountain and builds a road through, so that the wife can go and fetch water. Now, water crisis is again one of the debates which is largely situated in these popular culture debates that we are addressing or we are witnessing. And there is a very old concept of water wives, where we hear about it from Rajasthan. So people used to marry 3-4 times only for this management of water crisis, so that they can have more people to go and fetch water. It used to take a lot of time to go, at least maybe more than 5 to 10 kilometers to just get a handful of water, right? So you see how here we can see that gendered aspect of this crisis or the sustainability aspect that we are talking about. And then again, in the same film where we are referring to the water crisis, we also see that to a certain extent, this debate of gender is again subdued, because there is this man who is trying to build a road for the women to get and fetch water. And often we see that this gender and sustainability debate again brings us back to the concept of displacement, deforestation, where we see women have to travel longer in order to get wood for fire to come and cook. So we see that the time frame that is being considered, women have been affected more. Now, this man takes somewhere around more than 10 years to build this road in between the mountains. So, where do we put forth the debate of men and how they have been situated in the debate of gender and sustainability? And again, another very critical point that I would like to draw your attention to is, in this debate of gender or sustainability, when we talk about, we also often see that women, are considered to be the largest or the more sufferers of this sustainability debate. But through these two examples that I just presented in front of you, might uh, try to bring in the narrative of that sustainability is not gendered to the aspect where we talk about women, but rather it is a construct, as we know, feminism or how it is a performance, right? So again, bringing in that as well, we kind of negate the idea that women are not the only victims of this climate change, and this debate of sustainability should not really be around women, but bringing it or considering other genders into consideration as well. So that is my argument regarding gender and sustainability, how it is placed in the larger context of literature and films in popular culture that we see. There is again another film that recently came. It's called Pani. It's a Marathi film, and it talks about a very dystopian kind of society where a man is not able to marry because his village is suffering from water crisis. So he decides on that he'll first solve the issue of this water crisis in the village, and then only he will get married. So how the mainstream, which is like marriage is an institution, is so mainstream in our society, how it is being equated with crisis management or water crisis in general, how we look into the debate of gender and sustainability, even situating it in this century where in every household there are multiple taps. We just open the tap and we get the water. Still there is a section of the society which is undergoing this constraint of water crisis, and how the urban population needs to be more responsible, again not bringing in the idea of gender but gender neutral, and trying to solve or resolve the issues related to water crisis management, or again bringing in sustainability. So these are few aspects as how literature or English literature or film studies in India is trying to bring forth the debate, bring it in front of the audience, as audience kind of relate much with what we call as cinema, and cinema is a reflection of the society at large. So that is my understanding of gender and sustainability from a very nuanced aspect of tribal population in reflection to cinema and society. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Vibhuti. That was indeed an intriguing take on gender and sustainability. We do understand that India is very keen, because I speak from the perspective of international relations. India is very keen on especially SDGs 5 and 10, uh, that is on gender equality and to reduce the inequalities. So, taking cue from what you have just finished discussing, let me move on to Dr. Rahul Putti. I think uh, since we were discussing about the cultural aspects and also the gender aspects within certain communities in India, let's take it forward from there. What do you feel that there certain cultural practices or certain cultural norms or certain cultural institutions that India can uh, in the I don't think I'll be doing justice to the academic jargons here, but in a way show off, saying that these were the sustainable practices, these were imbibed into the culture, and maybe we could bring it to the mainstream as taking cue from what Dr. Vibhuti was pointing out.
Okay. Firstly, thank you, Another, and thank you, colleagues at VIT for having invited me here. Must issue a disclaimer here. I suppose there must have been some kind of a miscommunication because the profile that was read out mine, which was a rather terse introduction, is not really my background. I actually am from the field of languages and European studies, and for the last 14 years, my academic and professional work has been with building interdisciplinary language curricula and educational and cultural projects. And more recently, my work is as founder president of the first Association of Teachers of European Languages in India. Although there's a fair amount of ground that I can relate to what the previous speaker, Dr. Vibhuti, has mentioned, I'm afraid I will not be able to approach the very question that you point out in terms of sustainability and the gender perspective, because that's not really my area of work. So would you prefer that I still, speak about what I had in mind, or would you like to perhaps go around the panel and then we come back to my field, which was, I sent my abstract, which was more on approaches to foreign language education in Indian universities, and that
We
was,
will go ahead with what you are prepared with.
now as long as it doesn't create a dissonance with
Nothing.
perhaps there's some other speaker who's more qualified to address the question that you had, and perhaps to take
Because
it
from the list I was given, it was Dr. Vibhuti and you who were aligned along the same lines. It was given both of you were from English and Cultural Studies.
Of course, it would be a tenuous connection to establish, but I'm glad to have heard what was just mentioned. All right, so keep my comments, at least my initial comments, brief here. So the title of my paper was Familiarity and Estrangement, Approaches to Foreign Language Education in Indian Universities. The first place this topic is an ongoing research project. It's one of the dimensions that have come about in our larger project of developing a cartography of European language learning in India. Of course, we use the term European in full awareness of the problematic connotations that it can bring about. And towards this end, in April this year, we had organized there's a lot of background noise.
I suggest some colleague to close the microphone so you will not have the echo. Yeah. So for example, Vibhuti, Professor Vibhuti here.
Yeah, so in case, I think, it's better now. I hear myself better, so I hope it's the same for others. Yeah. So towards this end, we had organized a first of its kind conference in Manipal in April this year, which was titled Plurilingual and Intercultural Education, Cartographies of European Language Learning in India, which brought together for the very first time stakeholders, different kinds of stakeholders working in the fields of European languages and cultures to India. And our main objective was to, in fact, tease out all the possible areas of interest and study and collaborative work. In other words, to establish the terrain, because for the longest time, these languages have operated in silos within India, and for us to have approached it from a larger, broader, plurilingual, and a very specific European, or rather what I would like to insist upon, like as Europhone dimension, was one of the key outcomes. And the areas of interest that emerged during the course of this two-day conference centered around what you could say as looking at foreign language education through different units of analysis, such as actorhood, discourse, the curriculum, and policy aspects. And what I had to share was more along the lines of looking at the centrality of internationalization of higher education discourse and its effects on language policies or foreign language curricula in India. So this would be my opening statements for now, but I think in the interest of time, we'll just have the conversation move around, and perhaps I can come back to it, depending on what the format is. But perhaps maybe I would just like to point this out. that we see that increasingly that language programs are embedded within this larger discourse of internationalization in higher education. And the choice of, and whereas the same discourse is appropriated by institutional actors that I'm talking at the level of universities that favor what at least at this stage from our initial observations, a dominant model of the global north as we understand it in political terms. Whereas, this whole notion of tying up with the top 200 or the top 300 universities surely excludes a good part of, universities that are placed elsewhere in the world. And this has, indeed raised serious questions about what we might want to say as equity and access to higher education and the dynamics of, higher education on a global scale. So this would be my initial comments, but I would be happy to jump in at a later stage.
Thank you, Rahul. Now, with that discussion on languages in mind, I think I'll now shift to Dr. Garcia. Dr. Garcia, are you here?
Yes, I am here.
Yeah, so maybe something to what Rahul was speaking about, if you could further add on as to how, especially with relating to the SDG 11, when where it is one of the subset or the topic of discussion is to preserve certain communities and languages. Am I audible?
Excuse me, but there must be another microphone because I can't hear properly. I don't know. There's a kind of echo.
Am I audible now?
Yeah, okay, thank you. Sorry. Yeah.
No, it's fine.
I'm sorry.
So, no, it's perfect. So I was just wondering if we could take the discussion that Dr. Rahul Putty started off, initiated with, and then what are your inputs on the same, especially when it comes to SDG 11, where there is a special focus on preserving certain practices, languages, culture of certain communities. I would like to have your say on the same. What is your view on the same, and how do you feel that this aligns, especially with, I'm glad that Rahul brought in the aspect of policy circles when it comes to the aspect of language preservation, cultural preservation. So how do you think it works, and would it be effective? What are your views on the same?
Thank you very much for the introduction. It's a little bit like what happened to the previous speaker, that even though I'm a teacher of languages at the university, basically because we were going to talk about sustainability, both my colleague, Dr. Hernandez, and myself, we were going to talk about something different, which was basically how to approach sustainability from the interdisciplinary approach. Why is that? Because I am the director of the Center for Asian Studies in the University of Valladolid, and we greet you from here, from our very early hours in the morning. Yours is a little bit afternoon, and Dr. Hernandez and myself would have liked to be there with you, but because it's a sustainable conference, we actually approach sustainability by staying in our places. Well, we would have liked to be there with you, obviously, because you can't compare an in-person meeting with an online meeting, okay? Because I miss all the flavors all around, but next time it will be. But talking about all these things, I'm going to talk about a little bit what you asked me to do. Because, for example, I'm in another project in my own university for, let's say, fostering virtual exchange and blended programs. Why is that? Because, you know, the Erasmus program in Europe is a very, very important program that is not being extended to international students. And that is why we are now receiving students from India, China, Japan, and other countries that do not belong to Europe, because this program Erasmus is so successful that we have been extended to other students. Now, what was the problem with mobility? The problem with mobility, obviously, for international students is that there is not much money for them. not as much as for other European students. So talking to my colleagues in other countries in Europe, we have developed a program for virtual or blended exchanges. Why is that? Because then we give opportunity to all students who cannot move physically to have this opportunity to exchange. And also in that sense, we are also trying to contribute to have students with disabilities and students who cannot actually physically move to have this kind of share in these exchanges. The exchanges have been very successful. They are very interesting, because in this cross-cultural or intercultural aspect, we see elements that we might consider basic, but sometimes there's confrontation because they don't understand each other very well, and this cultural aspect is very important to address. So from this point of view, something else that I was going to talk about, and it's very nice that I really enjoyed the talk of the previous speaker, Dr. Raul Putti, because from my perspective is different. It's trying to teach obviously some like Asian culture in Europe, but teaching English as an English professor, also we are finding that Europe, in their laws or in their frame of language reference, is changing the concept of competences. For example, most of the competences before 2014, let's say, they were saying that the speakers of English, for example, I'm talking about English, but might be any other language, should be native-like speakers. And now this has changed, because who is the native? Right? It's like saying you have to be a Latin native speaker, excuse me, right? How are we going to do it? And I'm referring to Latin because both Latin and English are both instrumental languages internationally recognized. So we use language in order to communicate with each other. So sometimes when we have textbooks that teach English to other cultures, they, little by little, they try to, let's say, drive us to the road of native. But which native? Irish, South, the American, Canadian, Australian, which English, right? And also because there are some concepts, like they say, well, you have to be, in order to be considered, right, an articulate person, you really have to defend your arguments in a very strong way, right? Well, this is a very Anglo-Saxon European culture. Why do we have to, defend my argument in that way that in other cultures might be considered aggressive, right? So all these things we have to take into account, and that is why this virtual exchange is actually helping us quite a lot in this idea. And my other part of research is basically the image. I don't want to say image, the reception, right, of the first encounters between Spanish or Spaniards and Asian countries. And even though I've been working a lot in Japan, because I lived in Japan for 2 years, I also worked on a very interesting writer, a very interesting Indian writer, R.K. Narayan, who is he has not been very well understood in the West. But for me, for example, Graham Greene talked about him in a very, very positive way. And he said something that for me is really important in order to understand what is this cross-cultural idea. And he said that thanks to Narayan, and he's very grateful to him, Graham Greene actually understood the magic of India, right? And it's fantastic to hear that, because of course R.K. Narayan is a writer that mixes realism and what we consider fantasy, which is not fantasy, because in India it's part of the real world. So that's something that is very important, the reception of this writer in this sense. And I'm saying that because even though I've been working on the reception of, I said, writers from Asian countries in Spain, I met Dr. Hernandez, who was working on tourism, and we joined our forces together, and we are working on this idea of over-tourism, in which we actually try to embed my background of the reception of literature and the image of literature, the landscape, the people, and so on, with what happens with over-tourism. Are we losing, idiosyncrasies, individual idiosyncrasies of countries because this crowded or over-tourism? Are we doing that? And that is why we actually came here also with that idea of joining forces, interdisciplinary, and I'm very glad to have, listened to Dr. I think you're Dr. Vibhuti or Professor Vibhuti, Mary Vibhuti, and Raul Putti, because I think I don't work from a gender perspective, but I understand what Vibhuti said, and I think in over-tourism also there's a kind of genderization, right? In this over-tourism, also women there, they have something else to say, because most of the women we see in the small communities in rural areas, they are the ones who are doing this entrepreneurship, these little local activities that could actually should be looked after in this if we want to foster, if we want to implement tourism in the global south. So thank you very much. Sorry if I haven't answered your questions very directly, but I have tried to, put together everything that you asked me to, and also what we were here to talk about sustainability. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you, Dr. Gashes. That fit very well into the question I was aiming also. Thank you so much. Moving on to Dr. Correa, if you could further elaborate on what Dr. Gashes was trying to place her ideas on, especially with relating to national branding, or that is what she was talking about when she mentioned about the countries trying to forge their relationships on the basis of the culture, and especially have financial aid, because you definitely belong to the Department of Economics is what I'm being told. So I would also like to know about how sustainable financial practices can also be brought into place when we talk about sustainable tourism, when we talk about gender issues, and when we discuss about preservation of certain cultural practices.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so first of all, good morning, and thank you to VITAP University for giving me the opportunity to talk in this conference. Okay, according to what my colleague, Dr. Garces said, and my previous colleagues, Professor Vibhuti and Professor Putti, said, most of you says words like language, gender, culture, and the most important, sustainability. And what is tourism? Tourism is the mix of genders, the mix of languages, the mix of culture, and the most important in order to preserve the sustainability. I had the opportunity to live in China for 2 years, working in tourism also. And when I realized is that most of the South countries share the same problems about this over-tourism. So the first, Professor Vibhuti talked about water. And for sustainable tourism, the environment is having many problems. Degradation of the natural landscapes first. Second one is a strain on water and energy resources. And not only these problems about the water or about sustainability, but also sociocultural impacts of over-tourism, commodification of local cultures, my colleague Pilar talked about, displacement of local populations also, and impact identity, the cultural impact on identity. Maybe some cities, they're losing identity because of the over-tourism. But the most important you talk about in economics is the economic vulnerabilities in these regions. Now, for example, over-reliance in tourism revenues, the collapse in tourism revenue also, and the need for economy diversification. I compare, because my experience, I told you before, my experience in China, I compared 2 case studies, or we have compared 2 case studies in Yunnan in China and in Kerala in India, what we did with this kind of things. For example, in Yunnan, There are addressing many important challenges, especially in the rice camps, are overcrowded with many people visiting there. So they are trying to avoid the environmental degradation. And in the when we studied the case of Kerala, the influx of tourism has resulted in the commodification of the local culture, specific in this place. And the one initiative in Kerala, the one sustainability initiative in Kerala, has implemented different practices such as eco-friendly accommodations, community-based tourism, in order to mitigate these impacts. You have also the Swadesh Darsan initiative. I think is an initiative for tourism, talking about sustainable tourism practices. And in China, they have the 14 5-year plan. I compared those, what they apply in tourism, and the approaches to sustainable tourism. There are a strategic focus. First of all, the Indian initiative put the focus on the thematic tourism circuits, while China is integrate tourism with broader economic goals. So you talk about economy. So China gives importance to the economy, and in the case of the Indian authorities or Indian government, put the focus on make a thematic, especially circuits, not about the economy. And talking about the community involvement, both initiatives emphasize the community participation. But the Indian initiative targets cultural preservation more explicitly. Cultural preservation. So Indian put the focus in cultural preservation much more than economy preservation. Okay. So this is if you talk about what to do, I think we have to put to align private initiatives, public initiative, and only make some education programs. Education programs, or to give people resources in order to study how to behave in different countries, because we have different cultures, we have different backgrounds, we have different ways of doing things, and when we travel around, we don't behave properly in different countries. So the most important thing, I think, is put in practice these initiatives, sharing governments, private initiative, tourism companies, not only travel agencies, air companies, hotels, guides, or whatever. The challenge and the opportunities in this, according to the main topic of of this conference, you talk about navigating inequality, development, and sustainability in the global south. I think the most challenges is how to make an effective governance, right? Maybe to be critical for regulate tourism growth, how to regulate this tourism growth in order to preserve the sustainability, and align this with the environment and with the socio-economical goals also. And also, put the focus in the technological innovation, because the technology manage everything, they manage how to visitors flows, different people, how to enhance resource conservation through the innovation and technology. So the most important thing, even with economy, is from my point of view, two points is to look for collaborative effects, to look for the success in this sustainable tourism requires collaboration, I told you before, between governments, because local communities, because also private initiatives, but looking for in the long-term gains over the short-term profits. Don't look for short-term profits, look for long-term gains. And also how to balance growth and sustainability, I think is the most important thing. To change practices in tourism in order to balance growth and sustainability. That's my humble apportation. I think we have talked we have talking about the same, all of us, gender, culture, tourism, because it's the mix, how to manage this. My colleague Pilar before also with students, because students are the future, of our communities. They are traveling around in the world, so they can share languages, they can share gender, they can share culture. So I think we have to do the best with, first of all, in our universities, or first in our house, but maybe in our universities, in order to put the balance this and to grow for a future and growth and sustainability. Thank you very much for listening, and I'm here in order to hear my colleagues and to answer possible questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Correa. Now that actually gave me, I apologize if my comprehension isn't that great with this, but that actually gave me an idea that, especially when you were talking about involving the public-private partnership, the opportunities for the same, and then you were talking about a community involvement with certain sustainable tourist practices. I was actually thinking, why don't we start initiating a discussion on the aspect of certain social experiments revolving around the same? And that actually, I think the best person to, in fact, throw some light into it would be Dr. Dr. Daigi, Dr. Daigi Verghese. Do you think there needs to be some sort of deconstruction and later a reconstruction of certain social norms, the social mind, the social setup, that when we start discussing about sustainable practices, when we start initiating our debates around sustainable tourism, that we need to particularly focus on or ponder upon more?
Good afternoon, everyone. When addressing the question of reconstructing social norms, I would say that my research is also more in line with gender and sustainability goals. So my research was more into women who are part of microfinance program in Kerala. So so in that context, I would say that especially when we talk about sustainability in the context of women and work, microfinance as a program has come up as a quick route to women empowerment, assuming that economic empowerment alone can lead to women empowerment without understanding the complexity of women empowerment, or without understanding how different women from different social locations will have different requirements and needs. So a one size fits all approach will not work, especially when we talk about sustainability in the context of gender. So in that context, I would like to talk about few points. That is where my research expertise is coming from. So for one thing that I would like to talk about, one point that I would like to bring up is convenience that is being discussed when you talk about women's work. Okay, the sustainability of women continuing their work and then eventually that leading to a gender equal space or gender equality in terms of them making decisions or them having equal pay, equal participation workforce. All of that, one aspect which is also very important in that context is convenience regarding women taking up work. So I looked at women entrepreneurs who work from home as part of a self-help group. So convenience was very important for them, and that is where you also need to understand convenience within the context of existing patriarchal capitalist society, where convenience might seem like so suppose a woman is working from home, making snacks or selling the snacks in and around her neighborhood, would seem like something that is would be seen as an extension of domestic ideologies, or would seem as like a woman still doing the similar kind of work, but managing the work, the domestic chores, and also a monetary work. But here I would argue that you need to understand convenience more in terms of them also being a caregiver at home. So most of the women, what they have said is that they are able to sustain their work for a longer period of time, even if they have in between, they have to do caregiver roles. If somebody becomes ill at home, they are still able to sustain their work when they are being allowed to work in and around their home, or when they are being allowed to work with colleagues who would adjust for each other when they have these kind of emergencies at home. So one thing that is convenience, and how convenience in women taking up work needs to be understood from the specific context they are living in. So even if you come up with different kinds of policies or different sorts of work opportunities for women, understanding the aspect of convenience is very important. Another point that I would like to talk about is also, especially from, we are talking about sustainable development from global south, right? So where from a South Asian feminist perspective, I would like to talk about understanding women's agency and choices from a more contextual point of view, where you would through my research, what I came to know is that most women are not looking for a radical shift in gender dynamics or a radical shift in their lives. Rather, they look for organic changes over time, where it will not bring in drastic consequences to their life, but organic changes over time. And also another aspect that I would like to mention is again something that is Dr. Vibhuti also talked about, where having men at the center of the discourse, especially when it comes to gender equality, incorporating men also in the discourse of inequalities. So especially when I talk about the self-help group that I studied, it's called Kudumbashree. So they carry out gender awareness classes, different training programs, and all of that. And one of the thing most women have complained is also that they have to even find extra time for attending these awareness classes. So apart from handling domestic chores at work, and then also finding monetary income, they also have to sustain their work. As part of this, being in this organization, they also have to find time for awareness classes and training and all of that. And that is where I would also want to raise the point about bringing men also into the center of this discourse. And awareness is something which is very important in sustainable development, especially in the context of gender awareness and conversations and dialogue. So in that dialogue, it is important that men are also an integral part of this discourse, is one thing. Another thing that I would like to talk about, and also to understand women's work from a holistic point of view. My research is more interdisciplinary in nature. So I look at from my research also, in order for a women to, like, caregiving is often becomes a reason for career break. Women are not able to come back to work after they take a break for childbirth and things like that. So the support has to be more holistic. The women has to get support from the family, from the financial support. Consistent financial support is very important for them to sustain their work. So even when we come up with microfinance programs or different policies to have a gender equal society in the longer run, it is also equally important to understand that a one size fits all approach will not work when it comes to women's work or women empowerment. So those are the points that I wanted to bring up on. So yeah, if you have any other question, I can answer later. But it was great listening to all of you talking about sustainability goals from different point of views. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dege. Now, I think this would be another, and that's why I thought, because it's slightly different from the other discussion perspectives we had. That's why I believe that we could keep Dr. Santoro for the last. So, especially since I'm told your research focuses around the area of architecture. India is known for certain sustainable architectural practices, certain buildings that have been built along the idea of sustainable architecture. We would like to hear your thoughts on how this can further promote the perspective, the multidisciplinary perspective, and also the sustainability dialogues in the Global South.
Oh, good morning to everybody. Here is afternoon already. I'm talking from the Philippines. at the moment where I'm right now just relocated. I'm representing not only myself, but a group of researchers at the American University in Cambodia that a bit right now constitute a group of researchers and already alumni of our university. They are all over. Right now we are all spread around the world, and thank you for your question, especially if we consider the practices in India. What we can see is that they are not so distant as you might perceive from what you just discussed in the idea that concern languages, that concern cultural preservations, or concern even environmental preservation. So architecture is in the space in which we live, rather than just the building that we built. Most of the time, we are more focused about the object rather than consider that these objects are the enabler of our society, basically in the way the relationships are performed within the context in which we live. And then what we try to do is to adapt our natural environment. Now, Indian scholars and notable ideas for housing and in general districts that has been built by very prominent architects. If we can see Charles Correa from that perspective, Raj Ruval, they brought into the global context, speaking from the global south, ideas that has been quite well perceived as somehow respecting the concept of social transformations that happen constantly in our urban environment. What we see most often in the idea of preserving our society is the concept that sustainability is associated with the idea that social preservations doesn't have to change what we are and who we are. Instead, we see that in the opposite case, what we are and who we are change constantly. And as we hear from my colleague, we have cross-fertilizations, contaminations, and different actors that they play their own interest within the social relationship that they are constituted inside of our cities. So what we see from our perspective as urban designer and architects, the idea it's not much to preserve, but actually instead it's to modify our environment in the way that is actually more beneficial for who we are in general, or for whoever is on this globe. Nowadays, the environmentalist approach consider not only human beings, but all the forms of alive entities that are right now in our globe. So what we see also is the idea of preserving specific way of living. What we see is the idea of preserving completely our context. And on the other sense, cities, they play the opposite effect. They try to transform how we live. They try to innovate in what we produce, and then create something that it's in our idea a better environment. So now these ideas for us leads towards building blocks of our societies or our cities, and that have to be reformulated and have to be reconsidered in a way. And for this, our research focus on housing, since we see an urgent problem right now emerging in Cambodia, but in general in the Southeast Asian context or global South, where the cities they produce kind of situations in which we don't align on towards our objective of better the environment in that sense. On this idea of housing, therefore, we investigated heavily urbanized context, or contexts that they are in rapid urbanizations with steady economic growth. And in that sense also, we try to produce implications that they are not just for the reality that we investigated Cambodia, but in general Global South, or more in particular, I would say Southeast Asia, if I would be a bit more fair. And of course, models that, like the one that's being produced in Rajasthan or Ahmedabad, for example, they play an important role in the literature when we study these models. As well, what we try to do is to understand that so far what is happening in context of heavy pressures from migrations that happen to the fact that the city attract from a specific part of the country, especially rural portions of the country, or even inner portions of the city, the inhabitants towards specifically the suburban area, or in particular the peri-urban area, if we consider the context of most rapid transformations. We need our models to change and to become more adaptable in those conditions. So what we try to do with our research is to initiate a possibility of discussions on investigate if there are ideas within the current transformations that can adapt even more than the one that have been longly produced here in India, where you're standing, or even in other countries, and to reconsider what is possible to see as a demographic that is in complete transformations and evolving, even in the basic, where we consider the family compositions. And we see, for example, the Bangladeshi miracles that in spans of few years, the family changed from 6-7 people as a component to just 4. And then we have, of course, demographics that in China they were seen as limiting the growth of the people. Rather today, they seeing that the demographic is actually producing a cascade effect where there is a sort of implosions about what they produced. So what we studied is indeed to go back to one of the research that was produced during the modernist period, where the spaces of the house was reframed within flexible conditions, where and the Western dichotomy that right now creates a sort of contrast between the living spaces and the bedrooms, for example, or toilet versus bathroom, have been readjusted in that sense. And therefore, this, let's say, more Asian perspective allowed us to reshape what we consider more adaptable conditions. And we reframe within a space of what we call micro units, or even readjusted, recalibrated to the single individual, the possibility of modulate the space of the houses without necessarily frame those spaces in which they live with a category that has been associated to the current layout of the apartment that we see in the most globalized development that are right now imperversing in our suburban areas. Now, this was not meant to create distance between those new models that have been produced within the city. It was actually a way in order to recalibrate those models. What we studied, of course, are projects that has been developed in Cambodia, but also, and most importantly for us, also projects that has been developed in cities like Shanghai, Hong Kong, Singapore, that they were somehow producing solutions in order to counterbalance what has been indeed produced in countries like Cambodia and peri-urban areas of many global south countries, where we have an incredible sprawl characterized by spontaneous solutions that in that case produce a very inefficient use of the land and the infrastructure. Now, in this context, what we see is that usually these models that China produced are associated with a narrative, and especially I see also already my colleagues that define them as a dystopian in a way, or living in high-rise, very dense cities, and so on, especially suburban areas. But in that sense, we see a genuine concern of the urban actor to produce models that they actually are addressing the sense of community, or the productions of the sense of community, by introducing, for example, simply community centers, schools, healthcare facility inside of the initial development. If we see, for example, the development in Shanghai or in Hong Kong. But most importantly, right now we get already new models that are produced in Singapore, where the new towns, the new mixed-use towns, and not anymore the residential towns, not anymore the gated community that's been so much present in our suburban area, are somehow trying to integrate the community cohesions within their objectives, at least as an objectives. What we see, therefore, is an aim in affordable housing. Now, this research instead that we tend to produce, it's to also to address this concern between the terms of affordable housing and the term of social housing. Now, in literature, in affordable housing usually are addressing the idea of the needs of specific portions of the society, where the people that have low income, they are much in need of affordability for their homes. On the other side, what we see in the current regulations, for example, we analyzed the regulations of Cambodia. The idea of affordability, it's more tend to describe what is the average price of the real estate market, and associate these prices to the models that I have discussed right now. So what we try to instead produce, therefore, it's modifications of the approach, or transform this approach, where there is not such a sort of contrast between the idea of following one specific model of units that comes from the real estate market, and models that are indeed associated with social housing, we try to somehow create a sort of mechanism in which we might have multifunctional spaces reframed within the layout of the apartment without deeming them as rooms for sleeping or rooms for eating or any kind of particular function, sometimes even study room. So you have to specifically study in a room, or having storage room. On this kind of conditions, we try to reframe this and in a sense create adaptable element with minimal change of partitions or minimal change of the equipment that can fit indeed various needs in the society, and in that sense can produce a model that is adaptive, is in a continuous transformations, as indeed are our more resilient cities. So instead of having a target, therefore, for our long-term visions, we try to sustain our long-term visions with preconditions that are enabler for the crisis that we might confront and we don't expect nowadays. So this idea, of course, need and would be definitely more sustainable or will foster sustainable development if we have regulatory systems or incentives that might address all of this particular concern of the housing. But what we try to do is to reframe our perspective by combine market mechanism within the state interventions. That's what is happening. It's actually create, as you were pointing out, Mangabagwa, the idea of associate all the urban actors within the framework of public-private partnerships that benefit not only a particular strata of the society, but in itself creates synergies among all the actors. So this allowed us to not characterize even the buildings or even the district within the idea of social housing or the idea of social district or particular part of the suburban areas that is dedicated to a specific demographic, but actually to create a sort of mixed income, the mixed use of the mix of the community. And somehow a system, so we're thinking on natural systems, they are more resilient if they are more diversified. The more we tend to create a unique or designate a specific characteristic of the system, the less it will sustain, in a sense, the variations or the unexpected variations that we're facing as a society. So, of course, it's no need. What we find out, as Charles Correa was pointing out, if we look back into the modernist of the Indias, there's no need to sort of high-rise transformations of our building. And so if we contain the building within 6 and 15 floors, and if we even 15 floors is really high, so you can contain. And in our research, we try to stay within 6 floors, actually. The idea is that the amount of units or the amount of elements that you have to produce within the societies, within our that serve our society and within our urban context, it's enough to generate what is even a speculative approach, where we see, for example, the constructions of very densified, compact urban settlement. Okay, we have measures for this. It's a bit technical. If we see, for example, that urban transformations with high rise might produce 300 units and is necessity is to go higher to 30 floor. This is actually not really seen as actually an imperative. You can make it city more compact, lower. That's the history and the literature that our Indian colleague they taught us. And you might have the same amount of unit. The secret is within the space of the road, the space of element that they need to connect all of these large and tall buildings in that sense. So what we can see, for example, is quite striking. It's one of the most dense city center in the world, and city in itself, district in the world. Is we have a Spanish colleague here. Is the city of Madrid. If we look at the city center of the city of Madrid city, we have per square kilometer 250,000 people. And what we see, if we look at cities like Singapore, that is perceived very tall and quite inhuman in terms of scale, is just 7,000 people per square meter. So it's like 1 to 10, 1 to 20 sometimes. Oh, we have even the city, if we have the Indian colleagues, even the city of Mumbai, where we have incredible densities, they might not reach in certain area 250,000 people per square meters. If we see Delhi, for example, just the city center, I'm talking the city center, just not the entire city, it's just 25,000 people per square meter, per square kilometers. So that is quite impressive what a city of 6-7 floors like Madrid can produce instead of a city of 30-40 floors of Singapore or Hong Kong. There is a particular exception on it. It's the city of Bangkok, which is pretty densified, but it's a very mixed element in the architectural discourse. So what we see, therefore, is that in this idea, we have to readjust our way of building. We cannot maintain the usual element of bearing walls or brick walls that are produced within our current standardized constructions, but not so far. It's like is even going back, using, for example, the element of concrete structures where we have columns and frames and slabs might be not such as sustainable as the use of different materials that we are right now studying, as for example laminated wood, laminated bamboos for Southeast Asia, or the use of jute, which imply also the knowledge, local knowledge, and also the supply of local materials, and can also be readapted within the idea of having involvement of and participations of the citizen by including idea of self-constructions and participations in the definitions of their spaces. I add for these presentations pictures on what I was trying to show, what I was trying to at least frame within the principle that I was sustain right now. And I want to show with you just a few seconds. And that's what we were able to prepare. This is one of the units within this discourse. And what we had here is a mid-income typical unit that has been reframed within micro units here for low income, and even smaller unit, really a very beginning of the development, where it's not implied that we have to have one floor that has to have this specific unit, but actually we can see that the variations within the unit might occur during the time. And also here the idea of having just part of the city that we study here in Cambodia, in suburban area, where we have just few floors that can accommodate 300 units per hectare, which is actually one of the most dense situations that you can have in the speculative approach in suburban district right now. 300 units per hectare, if you are familiar with the numbers and the statistic, is pretty high. Okay, thank you for everybody, and I hope to not be so long.
Thank you, Dr. Santoro. I think it was much needed discussion that we went around, and I think it was right to point out how impactful Derrida is, not just in the field of cultural studies and literature, but also deconstruction that needs to happen in every single sphere of disciplines that joined here today. I would now like to open the floor for questions from the co-panelists and also the audience who have joined us. Please raise your hands if you have got questions. We would entertain them. Yes, Dr. Garcia, please go ahead.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. I really liked also the talk of Santoro's professor, and I would like to ask him something that has been in my mind for many years, which is the relationship between architecture, literature, and culture. Because obviously we have seen that some linguists like Barthes, Saussure, even Umberto Eco, they have talked about architecture as being very much connected with culture. And I would like to ask him, because he's been telling us many things about, how architecture is changing now because of different type of population, aging population, not many young people, or young people having, different types of families not being with so many children, but less children. Would you agree with the statement that says that architects should produce stories of places and places that are stories? Would you, consider that it's very important that the architectural, or let's say the treatment of space tells us a story about a culture? That's my question in that sense, because I'm really interested in this way of narrative, because as you remember that Umberto Eco especially said that architecture is not just function. It's not just technical aspect. Architecture is much more, and probably the use or the narrating of the story in architecture is before, and then comes the technical aspect of it. That just, anybody can join us, because also there's lots of things that we can say. I remember that now in Spain, for example, we have a kind of law talking about gender, in which they say that when some the inspectors come to see the different plans for architecture, they really have to look into a gender perspective. I don't really know what it means, but they say that I have to talk to look at the plans in architecture from a gender perspective. But anyway, so it's just an open question so that anybody can join and we can all talk about it. But that was my contribution now. Thank you.
Thanks for the question. Quite interesting also. And to reply to you immediately, what we consider as a built environment is actually for architect just a way to modify our space. And our primary concern is not the building, it's actually the inhabitant of the building. So therefore, it's the society at large and the culture that is embedded, of course, within the society. Now, to reply to you, sometimes the idea of cultural preservations or cultural representations within the buildings, it's somehow solidify in a visual context of traditional representations that, for example, in the postmodern approach has been somehow presented as sort of decorations in a way, rather than actually investigate what are the essential element of our living spaces and representative of our culture. Now, in this idea of representing the culture, you might go backward or forward in a sense. There is an embedded attitude of the architect and especially urban designer to project themselves not just in the past, but especially try to foresee what might be the possibility of the future. And on the other sense, try to not anchor their linguistic approach as a sort of style that sometimes in the literature, for those who are not architects, they've been associated with, in a way to reframe what has been done in the past rather than what actually we do today in the present. Now, to reply to you with another book, very much important for architect and the literature, and create these conjunctions between literature and architect. The city is constituted of invisible element rather than visible element, and that we have Italo Calvino presenting our invisible cities. What he was describing in his book, it's not actually what it was the eastern part of the world. It was its own city, it was Venice. Try to depict within that story all the possible element of a culture that actually it's layered within the idea of the merchants of Venice. Now, this is the same attitude that as an architect we tend to have in the idea of preserving, or let's say transform more than preserving the idea of the space in which we live. What we try to preserve is actually the dynamics of transformation. That's what we try to do. It's in the city, we see the city as an ecosystem nowadays in which the transformations happen constantly. If you try to freeze visually the conditions of a culture, you might produce a sort of effect that might induce the city to disappear. Or we see, for example, just to criticize a bit from Southeast Asia, the musealizations of the European city, in which you cannot live anymore, you can just observe. So we take out the very nature of architectural essence from that perspective. So yes, it's a representation of a culture, but in this sense, we see culture as an element that is not constituted of preconditions, but is actually evolving constantly. And therefore, I would see more probably the architect of today, just to have another literature in the cinema, let's say, more than sort of Blade Runner projections where we can invent our sometimes dystopian situations that reflect what we presume as a as a progressive or sometimes better environment, or pretend to have as better environment. But what what we can do nowadays is not anymore to plan the cities. And just we stop it finally. That's a good idea that is happening nowadays in the master plan, where we actually recalibrate everything within frameworks in which we can intervene just punctually by create large intervention if you want it, or have elements that might create long interconnections such as the infrastructure and so on. But somehow we right now understand that we can simply address the conditions from the preconditions without having such a target in imaginations that indeed freeze the conditions of culture. In a sense, if we want to intervene in the representative element of the buildings in the form of representations of the cultures, and it's valid in any aspect of our society. For example, even in the housing I was talking about, the housing, we don't prefigure the houses in the way we actually lay out. We try to have possibility for the inhabitant to transform it and then to embed their own culture. But more importantly, I would go even in a smaller brick of our social system in the identity of the inhabitant, reflecting each single portions of the culture. As we see, the social system are not simply reflection of one culture. I see India as an incredible variety of subculture are embedded within a system as a city or as a district as well, sometimes, or even a building in itself. I hope to have exhausted your question.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gashis, for the question and Dr. Santoro for the answer. Moving on to Dr. Rahul.
Yes, I have something to add to what Santoro just mentioned and to the question from Pilar as well. Although I'm not an expert in this field, but I did happen to read a very wonderfully written book by a British broadcaster, designer, who's of Yugoslav and Serbo-Croatian origin, Dejan Sucic, who has written a beautiful book called The Language of Cities. And in this book, one of the things that really caught my attention was the way to see how subconscious elements of human society are the underlying forces that go into the conscious elements of design, and within cities of the modern world, not densely populated cities. It's actually the scramble for resources such as like land, water, and I hope I'm making some kind of a connection to what the very first speaker Vibhuti had mentioned there. These are the elements that shape not only the conscious elements of design within architecture, but more importantly, like these ones are also the ones that confer the identities of the city dwellers or the citadins of like what you'd also like kind of alluded to in Calvino's Invisible Cities. So in fact, this very notion of at least in Mumbai's case, the very specific Mumbaikar or the Mumbaikar identity is so much centered around this idea of the architecture and the let's say the competition for resources, that it confers a special kind of identity, both in terms of like the answer to, or not the answer, but one of the perspectives to Pilar's question was how culture is integrated into architecture, but it's also the other way around, where you have architecture itself like shaping the identities that the city's inhabitants begin to like create for themselves. Just thought I would add that to this particular conversation. But to Pilar's earlier comments, and I was very thrilled to note that the approach that you're looking at is also one of the areas of work. That's the sustainability within internationalization of higher education, and of that of curriculum internationalization itself being a means to an end. And I'm pretty excited about this idea of the virtual like meet or the what is another project which we're working on with the University of Exeter is the global classroom, which is in fact like in fact addresses this very question of the asymmetry in terms of outgoing of student mobilities, and also to address a more important asymmetry which is part of our project, is to see the asymmetry, the language asymmetry, because it was quite interesting that as early as in 2008, what was found out that just four English-speaking countries account for more than like a 55% of outgoing like a student mobility, and this one really shapes the entire dynamics and the way we look at internationalization, and as an effect of which these are like there are several consequences in terms of the curriculum of universities, and as an extension, where we find ourselves in India are the language programs that become more and more embedded within this larger global discourse of internationalization, and how universities then legitimize their agendas or their aspirational agendas, which have consequences on students. So yes, so well, that was the broad picture. I'm sure like we are short of time, but thought we would leave us with those thoughts. Would love to connect with all of you again.
Thank you, Dr. Rahul. Yeah, exactly. I just also wanted to add on while Dr. Santoro was speaking. Especially in India, you would find that there are, I mean, areas where the fusion clearly, you could see the fusion between the architecture and the culture. And now it's the other way around also. So that was very well pointed out by Dr. Rahul. And Christ University has actually initiated certain global classrooms. So one, we have a course on global rights, and that we are doing it with University of Milan. So there's a total of 30 students from Milan and from Christ University who are together taught by teachers from University of Milan and Christ University. So yes, I think we are all on our way to ensure that certain sustainable practices are brought into practice. So this would be the final question, which has been raised by Audrey, and I'm sure Dr. Carlo had mentioned it, but I think she would need a bit more of clarity. So her question is that she resides in a densely populated city of Mumbai, which is also known for the largest slum, and there is continuous migration that is happening in the city. So she's asking, does she fall under that purview where she could her right to privilege over culture and functionality, whether she could put forward culture over functionality? A very relevant question, which I know most of the city dwellers do think about. So she wants to know, does she have the right to privilege culture over functionality in a very densely populated slum?
I see a sort of contrapositions within the two terms,
Yeah.
Culture versus functionality, that not necessarily is there. I mean, why we have to privilege cultures over functionality? So usually there is the idea of architectural design is a sort of plurivocal conditions where not necessarily you should oppose the two terms culture and functionality. Most of the, for example, popular culture address the necessity of functionality as privileged conditions. For example, for instance, we see agricultural culture where all the instruments of the farmers are indeed preserving a way of being functional and at the same time cultural associated. And therefore, what we got here most probably it's the idea of specific models that have been introduced as a functional from a sort of modernist approach that tends to arrive from European scholars or architects. For example, in India, we see quite important intrusions from France, from the CIM movement. We have Le Corbusier. We have Pennsylvania University later coming. We have even architects that have embraced modernist in a sense and then become postmodernist by introducing element of aesthetics, appearance within the modernist paradigm of functionality. Now, I would say you have the right to claim both in Islam, culture and functionality, not culture over functionality. There is no necessity of this kind of dichotomy. In the sense, I understand sometimes certain solutions are sold as aesthetically more cold in a way in order to depict possibility of having vertical element or even more compact element, more dense element, and where this happen, element of decorations or element of spaces has been sold in a different way than the traditional way of living in the countryside sometimes, or living in the peri-urban area, and so on. Now, what I would say is that you might do whatever you want it with your buildings. You might even create fabulous ideas, but if you tend to put people of the same kind of nature, you might have a dystopian conditions. Even if you put all the rich people together, you don't need to create a slum, it will be a dystopian situations in which they cannot live as integrated cultural part of this cultural inhabitant of our society that they have concern in terms of cultural expressions. So it happens in France, for example, if you look at the Grand Ensemble experiment of the suburban area of France, where you might have created the most interesting models of buildings, but once they create a ghetto of the people will transform it in a way that reflect their conditions of surviving, and then struggling with the associations of being part of a pure community that is being displaced outside of the benefit of the central portions of the city. Usually they are put in the suburban area. So it doesn't matter what you design. If you don't try to have mechanism in which everybody can benefit from being in the proximity of a diverse human being or a diverse neighbor, then you will not make it. And you will not have a functional building, and you will not have a cultural expressions within your neighborhood. So you might have. Nowadays, our idea is indeed exactly this. With our ideas, we're trying to present is not to.
I think we have lost Dr. Carlo's connection.
To have a frozen.
Yeah. You're
I'm
back.
here. I'm back.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, you're back.
So this possibility, you have to diversify the system, and then don't frozen culture or frozen functions, and that's the same. So the possibility is to have a element in transformation nowadays, and as an architect, we can enable both without renouncing to anything. of these two elements.
Thank you, Dr. Carlo. I think this whole discussion we had revolving around the dialogues, the sustainability dialogues in Global South, I believe it is very important that we need to have two most important criteria when we talk about sustainability. One is the fact that we are willing to take some sort of risk. And I realized that all of us, we were talking about including some sort of social experiments in the disciplines that we were discussing while we were talking about sustainability practices. The other aspect is that we wanted really to talk about public-private partnerships while we talked about sustainability initiatives. We also discussed about the importance of deconstruction while we were talking about respective disciplines and the areas we were largely engaged in. I found the session very intriguing. I'm sure my fellow panelists would also have felt the same. I would have loved to extend the session for a longer period if it was not for the paucity of time. I'm very grateful for Dr. Garshes and Dr. Korea to have joined us in the early hours of the morning. And now, formally, I would like to extend my gratitude to all the fellow participants here for joining us in, Dr. Carlo, Dr. Degi Verghese, Dr. Bibhuti. I would now hand over the session to Dr. Badshah, who is the moderator. He would have final comments to make on our session.
Thank you so much, Anagha ma'am. So now we really want to make this scholarly frame stay with us forever. So I request you all to open your cameras to make this moment memorable forever until we meet again for this kind of discussion in the future. Please open your cam so that we can take some screenshots and see your brightening and intellectual faces. Thank you.
Dr. Vibhuti, if you are there, could you please switch on the camera and join us?
Am I not visible? Actually, my camera is on.
Yeah. Now you are.
Oh.
Now you are visible. Thank you, ma'am. Formally, to thank you all. First of all, I'd like to apologize to Sir Dr. Rahul Putti for the miscommunication. Sir, I really take that from my side. So I'm sorry for that. I will make sure it will not happen in the future. And I thank all the professors for all the scholarly, rich, sensitive, radical, contemporary, and like the need of the hour kind of discussion. And all we have learned today by all of your valuable inputs will be taken ahead with more care, academically as well as socially. With this, let me wind up the session. I generally thank you all once again for this wonderful discussion and being so patient all along. Thank you, bye, and take care.
Thank you very much for all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to the Vellore Institute of Technology and Andhra Pradesh University. Thank you. It was a pleasure
Bye-bye.
sharing with you. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
All of you. Thank you.